Hello, welcome to this session on called "Win the Game." It's a growth concept, and I'm here. My name is Bryan McCloskey. I'm here to teach you. I'm here to teach you today the one simple technique that I learned changed my life forever. That as I've teach my clients, and hope ideally you'll be able to take some insight away from today's talk, because what I'm going to teach you really helps us understand how to keep score and win the money game. Really hope you're enjoying all the sessions here at the summit itself. This is the first time we've actually done this for clients directly, and we really want you to take as much out of this as possible. So welcome clients, welcome friends and family of clients. What you're going to learn here in this session with me is essentially an overarching concept that you can apply when you're listening to some of our strategists talk about using wealth max accounts and the perpetual wealth strategy to reduce debt, or to invest in real estate, or to pay for college, or to build a legacy. You're really going to be able to plug in all those strategies into how you're taking advantage of the perpetual wealth system and where that policy is in your world. But more importantly, what we're going to talk about today is some of the concepts around thinking strategically about your dollars, and like I mentioned right here, talking about keeping score and understanding how money works so that you can truly make sure that you're winning the game. It's almost like a scoreboard. We want to effectively see how money's working for us. And I will say this to start, and there's a little bit of conspiracy in this presentation because I'm pulling back the curtain on a lot of what happens in the financial world. I will say this: if you're not keeping score, just know that someone else is. And that someone else is most likely, if you're not keeping score, that someone else is most likely beating you at the game of money. So some of the key points we're going to talk about today, probably in the next 45 minutes or so, 50 minutes, is knowing how money works, how it flows, and how, or even whether it's working for you, are all keys to winning the game of money. You're going to actually see how easy it is to keep score, even on the back of a piece of paper or the back of a napkin. That way you can know just how close you are to winning the game and effectively learn how to improve your score over time. And then lastly, I got to let you know what I'm going to teach you. We're going to walk through it, but essentially the technique is simple. The problem is not everybody uses it. And using the technique I'm going to show you could mean the difference between success, achieving your goals, financial success, financial independence, and perpetual struggle. So let's move on. But you probably have that little voice in your head, like, what's Bryan talking about here? I just want to hear about, investments. I want to hear about making my money, earn such and such. That's all good and all well and good. But let me just tell you, what we're going to talk about here can actually make your money work harder for you. I think the most important thing that I've found, both in my own life, and I told you this thing has worked for me, the most important thing that I found is when you're first learning about something, or when you just blindly follow the advice that we hear about finances, typically from banks and Wall Street, typically from HR departments, typically from TV. That stuff puts us in a world where we don't quite understand everything that's going on around us, and it can be very difficult to make good decisions. I was thinking, as I was putting this together and thinking about these concepts, there was an idea that I heard from two people. One is an NFL quarterback, successful NFL quarterback. The other was essentially a retired Navy SEAL who successfully commanded and Gary and Eric will use the right language, but successfully commanded his troops through numerous tenuous situations. And they said they both said this in their own language. They said early in their careers, when they were involved in the game, when they were effectively, everything was moving so fast, everything was new to them, they weren't able to make the best decisions. They tried to make good decisions, they tried to do the right things, but at the end of the day, they found out that it wasn't always the optimal decision or the best thing they could have done. What they found, both from being taught and both from the experience that they had from being involved in their careers and in their professions, experience was a teacher. So from being formally taught and from having experience teach them, they found that they could actually raise themselves above the situation, raise themselves above the game. And by doing that, they could effectively see the game better or see the situation better and make much more efficient decisions. And the same thing applies to us when we're dealing with our money. When we don't understand how cash works, we don't understand some of the concepts behind what we're taught, and we blindly follow it. If we don't understand how all that's working, we may pick our heads up in the future and be very upset about the outcome. I know some of my clients who are at that stage of the game where they're no longer building, they're trying to live off of their assets. They know what we're talking about. They've been led down a road and they followed and they thought they did the right thing, only to find out that that right thing benefited your competitors, benefited the people who are positioning themselves to use your hard-earned money, not always for your benefit, but potentially for theirs. So I'm going to introduce you to a way where we can step up above the game and look at it through what I call a scorecard. All right, and what's really interesting about the scorecard is that it's actually used by the very same folks that we're going to talk about today that are essentially your competitors. They're struggling to take your hard-earned dollars and earn a lot of money off of them with maybe no promises to you, or maybe slowing down what those hard-earned dollars of yours can do for you. And let me actually see here. I mentioned that when I discovered this technique for myself 10 years ago now, when I discovered this technique for myself and started to understand the story that it tells, it changed my life forever. Changed my life forever. That's actually one of the reasons why I opened my first whole life policy, and actually it brought me into this industry where now I'm very passionate. I understand so much more, and I teach folks about it now. All because it actually started with this concept of the scorecard, of understanding from above how money works. So what is the scorecard? Here's a scorecard. I actually, you can easily draw it on a piece of paper, napkin, but I'm gonna actually show you on the screen here, and then also offer you a download later where you can either copy or print your own scorecard and start to use it. But effectively, what is it and who uses it? Well, the scorecard is actually used, believe it or not, by businesses, by banks, and by the government, even though their scorecard's a little bit messy, right? It's a simple tool. It's a really simple tool, and it's based on simple accounting principles. I'll break that down for you in a second. But most importantly, successful businesses, successful business owners know how to use this tool so that they win their individual game. Let's take a look at the scorecard itself. On a scorecard, this is something you're going to be able to download, or you can easily, like I said, you can easily copy this right now and draw it on for yourself once you understand where things go. But when you have you have an income statement up top, and you have a balance sheet down the bottom. Both of those sound like accounting terms because they are, right? Money, that's what accounting is, the profession of tracking and accounting for money, right? So we take these simple concepts, those two simple concepts, put them together, and we have a scorecard. Now, interestingly enough, you see a few more things here. You see a red line, and you see a green box out here. These are going to become extremely important when we start talking about, do we have net investable dollars? When money comes into our world, do we have net investable dollars to invest? And then secondly, are we tucking money down below this red line, which I'll talk to you about in a second. But I wanted to let you see that businesses, banks, and the government all use this simple technique. And let's talk about a healthy business. Let's talk about it. Think of some business in your mind, whether it's a local business in your town, or whether it's a big business that you have products of theirs from, right? You're a customer, and when you send them cash, whether it's your cell phone company, whether it's your cable company, whether it's the car company that you bought your last car from, or whether it's a local business where you go and you buy some knickknacks or something like that, you basically send them cash, and that's considered income to them, right? As it flows through their income statement, they pay their employees, they pay their rent, they pay their electric, they pay their overhead, they pay their marketing, stuff like that. They have expenses. And if they're a successful business, they have enough money coming in the front door to overcome their expenses so that by the end of the day, the end of the month, they have a positive net cash flow, right? You can tell a business is successful for the most part because it's thriving. Either it stays in business, you see it stay in business, you see its employees are happy because they're getting paid, you see it expanding, things of that nature. And talking about expanding, one of the things that good businesses do with that positive net cash flow is they actually move it over to their asset column, and they use cash. Sometimes they use the bank, which we'll talk about a little bit, but they then purchase new assets, whether those assets are the doodads that they're selling, whether those assets are human assets, meaning they invest in more people that can go out and make money for them. They invest in physical real estate. They invest in research and development to develop new products in that nature. And they invest here because ultimately, wherever they put their money to work here, it's going to turn around and create new income for them. Okay, these patterns are going to actually come into play as we dig into this a little bit deeper. So that's a good business. And even if a good business uses some debt, let's say a good business borrows, actually I'll put it out here where I typically put it. Let's say a good business borrows some money so that they can expand an asset. They're doing that because they know that asset can create more income for them. Now, since it's a loan, if they borrow from a bank or if they borrow from a private investor, an institutional investor, that loan will in fact create some expenses, right? But a good business knows what it can take on, knows what it'll earn from that loan when it puts it to work, and knows that the income coming in the front door will be enough to offset that so that they stay in the positive net cash flow, right? So that's a good business. If we could all just run our households like that, because here's let's look at a struggling business, right? So struggling business. Maybe it is actually selling product. Maybe it is offering a service, whatever, money's coming in. But when it goes to pay its expenses, the expenses are too high. Maybe it has too many employees. Maybe they're not driving enough income to offset the expenses. Maybe they expanded too fast and they have loans that are causing some problems and creating significant outflow so that by the time they get to the end of the month, they have negative net cash flow. What does that do? That causes them to have to take assets to satisfy a loan or take assets to pay an expense as opposed to drive it for more income. And if we stay in that spiral too long, and if that business stays in a negative cash flow environment too long, well, then they're in trouble, right? And what happens? They close their doors because they can't survive, right? So we have the other, hopefully you see, and you've probably seen this before with your wealth strategist, or for those of you who are invited here, some of this might be a new concept, but it's this scorecard. It's this financial statement, which we're going to call a scorecard. It really helps us understand, especially from a cash flow perspective, whether things are healthy, whether a business is healthy. Well, it's really interesting. A business's scorecard is basically identical to our scorecard, right? It looks the same. And there might be a little voice inside your head as I'm telling you this. We're walking through this and you're seeing this and you're like, oh, it's accounting. Oh, Bryan, I didn't want to talk about budgeting. I didn't want to talk about cash flow statements. I just want to talk about investments. I just want to know where I can put my money to work, this, and that. Listen, all that stuff's important. But if you blindly chase returns, if you blindly chase advice that says, oh, don't worry about all that stuff, just come over to us, you're going to find that you can be putting your money in a position to work harder for someone else. And that's what we're actually going to talk about today, that typical advice, because most people do just that. They have their money they have their money sit down on their balance sheet, sit down on their scorecard, in a place that just rests for them, but effectively works hard for someone else. And we're going to look at that typical advice and some of the outcomes of that typical advice over the next few minutes, right? So what is some of the typical advice that we hear? We hear save for retirement. We hear have an emergency fund, right? That's some of the typical information that we hear. And we've probably been hearing that since we were a kid. Maybe our parents told us that. Our first job told us that. The HR department told us that. TV tells us that. Newspapers tell us that. You're supposed to quote unquote save for retirement. I have a hard time with this word save because technically when you put money into the common place for this, where's the most likely place for someone to think that they were supposed to save for retirement? What have they been taught? The 401k. Well, let's take a look at where the 401k sits on our scorecard. 401k sits on our scorecard on your balance sheet. Listen, it's an asset of yours. No doubt about it. And if you have an employer that's matching you, great. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the incentives that go into why people shove money there. But bottom line, they've been taught to save for retirement. Technically, they're investing, but they've been taught to save for retirement into a 401k, full of mutual funds, whatever's offered to you. Over time, it's supposed to go up. Well, here's what happens on the scorecard. This is very interesting. Let's watch these patterns. We're going to look at your pattern, and then we're going to look at the pattern of the business that offers you this, the 401k. Well, you notice this red line I haven't really talked about on the scorecard. That red line represents Uncle Sam. And one of the attributes of a 401k is when you have your hard-earned money and your wages about to come in the front door, meaning it's about to be paid to you, you're actually taught and you're incentivized to take that money, not constructively receive it, so meaning not take it into your income statement, but more importantly, shove it down here below the red line, below Uncle Sam, this line that represents Uncle Sam down here, into a 401k. Now, why is it down here? It is on your balance sheet. It's an asset of yours. The problem is you have $100,000 inside your 401k. That $100,000 is not all yours. Some of that's Uncle Sam's. Now, why is that? Why is that? Excuse me. Well, that's because he allowed us to put that money down there before it was taxed. So now, in the future, when we go to pull it out, he is in line first, right? But there's also down there below the red line for another reason. We're not allowed to touch that money without penalty and taxes. We're not allowed to touch that money until 59 and a half. So not only are we quote unquote incentivized to put money in there, we're also incentivized to leave money there. Okay? So we're taught to save for retirement into these vehicles where we can't constructively access the money. Whatever. It is what it is. Listen, you might have a 401k. You might still want to invest through a 401k, even when you're using a perpetual wealth strategy and the cash value policy like we talk about. But it's important to see what's going on here. We're putting our money down here where we can't touch it. It's all our hard-earned money, and we're losing access to that money for a long time, depending on what your age is. Let's see what's happening on Wall Street while we're doing that. Okay, because it's all about patterns right here. So you have money that's about to come in the front door. You decide to shove it down here inside your 401k. So you see where the arrow is going. Now, what Wall Street does, this is technically your asset. The money that's in your 401k is technically your money. But what Wall Street does on their books, your account, they're going to basically take that asset under management. That account is going to either collect fees or transaction costs for them as they turn stock inside the mutual funds, or as they charge management fees because they're making decisions on the mutual funds, or custodial fees and things of that nature. Your assets, your account, your 401k, I'll actually write 401k here. Your money is creating income for them. Let's watch these patterns, okay? So that's the typical save for retirement. What's happening on your scorecard? What's happening on their scorecard? Here's another piece of advice. We're told, and this is an important advice, we're told to make sure we have liquid cash. We've been probably told for a real long time to call it an emergency fund. I don't like the term emergency fund because, this is what happens when we save into an emergency fund. We essentially hold cash in the bank, and that cash sits there at what? 0%, right? So an emergency fund is not sexy. Emergency fund is not fun to hold. It's important to have. It's important to have access to liquid cash. The concept is important. But that liquid cash is there not only just for emergencies, but it's also there for opportunities. So that's actually why I don't like necessarily call it an emergency fund. I personally like calling it an opportunity fund. If you need to use your opportunity in the event of emergency, hey, so be it. But the money that we've locked up in the situation up above, down here, we can't count on that for emergencies. Why? Because we go to pull the money out and we get taxed and penalized on it. Why do people need it sometimes? They need it for healthcare expenses. They need it for when they lose their job. You can't take a loan from a 401k anymore when you lose your job, when you're not working there anymore. Right? So you have to take a distribution. Then you have problems with the distribution and penalties and whatnot. So we need to have some access to liquid cash, or at least it's prudent to have access to liquid cash. So what's happening? What we do is we take our wages again. Let's watch this pattern. Now we pay taxes on our dollars. We pay our expenses off. Hopefully we have more money at the end of every month. That's the plan, right? It's what we're, not necessarily, but people think of budgeting. It's kind of in here. We have money at the end of every month. What do we do with it? Well, some of that money can go into a liquid position, but people don't like that because it's not earning anything for them. Here's a question: your money's not earning anything for you, but is it actually earning money for the banks? Hopefully, you probably answered the question with a yes. Let's take a look at this on a balance sheet. Let's take a look at this on the scorecard. Here it is again. Wages come in the front door. You pay your expenses at the end of every month. Let's say there's a positive number. You put that money down here, a little bit saved in the bank. That's great. Your money's in there, but you know what? It's earning nothing. Okay, it's important to have it. Important to have access to liquid cash, but the money that you have there is earning nothing for you, right? Sitting there stagnant. Let's look what a bank does. So when you go and you deposit money into a bank, and you may have talked about this with your wealth strategist, and there's definitely videos on our website about this, but it's important to talk through this and watch the pattern. That when we put money in a bank, our deposit account is actually a liability. Our account is actually a liability to the bank. Why? Because we can come in and withdraw it at any time. But it's really incredible. They're the only ones that are allowed to do this. They're allowed to create money out of thin air. They're allowed to fractionally lend off of our dollars and essentially just print dollars and create loans. How do banks make money? They charge fees on things. One of those things, fees and interest, one of those things that they charge fees and interest on are loans. And when we deposit money, they can create loans. A loan is usually a liability to us. A loan to a bank is an asset to them. Here's the deal. They took our money, created a loan with it, and what does that loan do? It creates cash flow for them in the form of income. Again, look at where the arrows go. Look at the patterns here, right? One more. Let's do this. Now, we've been taught by this point, we've been taught effectively to shove money in a bank, to have liquid access to cash. Our money's not working for us. We've been taught to shove money down in our 401k, right? We're not that liquid anymore. So what's a bank do to come to banks in Wall Street created a problem where we're not that liquid anymore. But what do they also do? They say, hey, we'll solve that problem. We'll offer you easy access to credit. Credit to us is a liability, right? Now, please also understand, here's my little disclaimer here. Sometimes using debt is strategic when it comes to financial strategy and investing and whatnot, especially when the debt is collateralized against something. That's actually one of the reasons why a cash value policy, cash value is some of the strongest collateral you can get. You can lend up to 95% of it, right? So, or the cash value. So, I'm looking at this from the perspective of unsecured debt, right? Primarily, we're going to look at unsecured debt. So we create the banks come along and they say, hey, you're not liquid. You have all your money in the 401k because you're trying to chase returns. You're trying to chase returns and save, incentivize to save taxes because you can't get any money in the bank. So what we'll do, since you have to pay for vacations, you have to pay for your kids' braces, you have to pay for a car, you have to take a vacation, you have to buy a big screen TV, any of that stuff, right? We're going to offer you access to credit, loans, credit cards, things of that nature. And what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to basically pay us monthly until that you pay it all back, right? They're going to set all the terms. They're going to check your credit, make sure you're credit worthy. If you're not credit worthy, they're going to jack up the interest rate, right? If there's no collateral involved, it's higher interest. That's all create, and that the servicing of those debts, the servicing of the debts on this scorecard all create expenses. And that expenses puts a crimp on net cash flow, sometimes making it zero, sometimes making it negative. That's when a business, or in this case, a person or a household, every single one of us have a scorecard. Every single household has a collective scorecard. That's when when things are in a tough spot, when you start to see zero or negative net cash flow here. But if we look at the bigger picture, here's our money that came in the front door, and we were told, to put money in the bank, and we were told to put money in a 401k, and we were told to use loans and credit cards. Those loans and credit cards create expenses. I'm sure you get this by now. Those loans and credit cards are liabilities to us. What are they to the bank or institution that offers it to us? Here's our loan. Here's our credit card. What are those things doing? They're creating income for the bank that offered it to us. So it's really incredible. If we circle back here and look at the patterns, just think about the patterns that are going on. You and me are taught to put our money down below the red line. We're taught to put our money here, and we're taught to use easy access to credit. The entire time we're taught to do that, bank turns our money into an asset and creates cash flow. Wall Street takes our money, and through its fees and its management costs and whatnot, it creates income. Look at the directions of the arrows. Look at the directions. This is what I was talking about when I was talking about pulling back the veil a little bit. And it's this whole idea of seeing the money from up above, looking at the cash flow, understanding what are you trying to do with your cash? Let it sit somewhere, hopefully grow, or are you trying to create flow off of it? And I was thinking about it. I used the NFL quarterback analogy earlier, and I was thinking about it when I was putting our talk together today. If I was a coach, and I've been involved with sports and with coaches for a long time, and I just think right now to a football coach, if we're going to talk X's and O's, if I was a coach and I was looking at our scoreboard and we were following the typical path, I'd say, guys, we're getting crushed out there. Look at the X's and O's. Look at the gap. Look at where we're putting our money, and now it's working for the other team. We're losing this game. But more importantly, look at the gap in the space where they're investing. Let's go back up here. Where are the assets on the Wall Street and the banks, Wall Street and the banks scorecards? The assets are right in the middle here. What are they doing? They're creating income. So if we come back to our scorecard and the coach is giving us a halftime talk, well, look at the X's and O's. We need to get money in here that we can put to work for us, where it can grow and possibly cash flow. So it's not just grow. It's like, how can we get this money to flow for us? How can we position our cash to help us become financially independent, to help us secure tax-free income in retirement, like you're going to hear Nate talk about, to help us position money that we can depend on, where we can increase our income in other capacities. You're probably going to hear Brent talk about that, Chad talk about that in other sessions in the summit. It's all about X's and O's with where we put the dollars. But if we look at this and we look at what the banks and Wall Street have been doing, why did they do that? Why do they do? Well, it's their business model. They're not doing it. They're not offering us these products just to help us, right? They're offering these products because, number one, they might help us, sure, but they've also created an environment where we need their products. Think about it. If we follow typical advice, that world is created where we need their products, and then we're going to take a look here in just a few moments as to how much they profit from those products. And this, when I say they profit, remember, when I say they profit, they're only profiting because money's flying out of our pockets. So, let's take a look at this. So let's take a look at the numbers. What type of products does a bank? We're going to look at the banks and we're going to look at Wall Street. What type of products does the bank offer us? Well, they offers us mortgages, student loans, credit cards, auto loans, things of that nature. All right, let's just look at these one by one here. Mortgages. I found right now a typical interest rate, and these change all the time, you know that. Typical interest rate right now is 3.9, and most people get a mortgage for 30 years. Okay, so especially our clients that are here at the summit, you guys are probably familiar with some software we use called Truth Concepts. So you're going to see me. I already crunched these numbers on Truth Concepts, but I'm going to pull them over for us as we look at this. So what I'm going to do, we have a $250,000 loan. I summarized these. You're going to see this in a second. $250,000 loan, 30 years, 360 months, 3.9%. So that's almost a $1,200 payment, and over the course of 30 years, we started with $250,000. By the end of those 30 years, we've paid back $424. Okay. So obviously, and this is what this chart over here shows, we started with a $250,000 balance. By the end of us paying it all back, we paid the bank back $424,000. So we paid them $174,000 in interest cost. Of course they want to offer us money whenever they can, especially when they have it secured against an asset that they can take back if you start to miss payments here or there, right? But more importantly, this is where it really gets interesting. More importantly, let's just look at the first few years, especially the first few years when someone might refi a few times or buy a house. And you've probably heard these numbers. The realtors are in the room. If we could yell out loud, you could probably tell me how often someone actually stays inside a home. I've heard 7 years. Sometimes people buy a house and move within 7 years. So, let's look at what happens actually. This is what I did. Let's look at what happens in the first 5 years. So 5 years is 60 months. So we take that same loan and just look at it for the first, here it is. We're going to look at it for the first 60 months. Take that same loan. We're going to have paid back $70,000. But of that $70,000, here's the interest. $46,000 is interest. So let's look at this. So $70,000 gets paid back. But $46,000 is effectively interest. So 46 out of 70. Is that right? I want to make sure I get this. 46 out of 70. 46,000 out of $70,000. 65% of what you pay back. Here you are just thinking that your interest rate is 3.9, and technically your interest rate is, but the volume of interest you're paying back to that bank in the first 5 years, 65% of your payments go to the bank's pockets. 10 years, 120 grand, 120 months. Take a look at this. Paid back 141. 87,000 was interest. 87 divided by 141. Still, 10 years in, almost 62. 61.7% of your payments. This is called volume of interest, if you've ever heard that from your wealth strategist. That much money is just straight coming in as income, not knocking down principal. That much of your payments, that portion of your payments, is straight coming in as income to the bank. And listen, we need a home to live in and all that stuff. I'm not arguing that right now. I'm just saying I want you to see what some of the common advice ends up resulting in, right? Student loans. We're supposed to go to college. That's somehow supposed to get us a job. 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Kids are still in college. When they get out of college, most loans are financed for 10 years at that point, amortized for 10 years. Student loans can last longer than that, especially if someone refis for a longer period of time, which I'm going to talk about in a second. Interest rates right now. Subsidized loans, which means the government's helping pay some of the interest, 3.76, and there's maximum limits on them. Unsubsidized loans offered through good old Uncle Sam, 5.31. And there's max limits on them. And then if you need more money, you have to start paying private or parent plus or personal loan type rates, which could be 6 or higher. Now, the average household college debt right now for houses that have college debt is in the neighborhood of $48,000. So let's just take a look at this. So what does that do? I told you I was going to talk about cash flow. If you amortize $48,000 of a loan over 10 years, that creates, I'll actually pull up the truth concepts. That creates $48,000 creates a $500 a month payment over 10 years. $48,000 if you refi because you want to lower the payment over 20 years drops that payment down to $316. Okay, so here we go. We have $48,000 balance over 10 years starts out at $500 a month. That could be a cash crunch for a newly employed person just coming out of school. So what ends up happening is the bank says, okay, we'll work with us and we'll refi it out over 20 years. I'm estimating a 5% interest rate across them all. You see, from a consumer standpoint, I can drop my payment by close to $200 a month. That's the way to go. Well, that's all great. Just understand, one of the reasons why the bank offered this to you is that you are going to pay more in interest over time. Okay? Again, money out the door, liability to you, expense to you, income to them. Let's take a look at another one. Credit cards offered by banks, variety of banks. You probably count how many credit card offers you got in the last, X number of days, even the last week. Interest rates can be anywhere from 9, 11%, all the way up to 24+%. What I did in this example was I just said, hey, what if people have a balance of 20 G's and let's say they have at some point throughout their working years, let's say they're working for 30 years, let's say they're carrying 20 G's for 20 years. It's hard to make all these estimates, but let's just take a look at this. Where is my, here we go. Credit card payment. So what if the credit card interest rate is 13%? What if we have a $20,000 loan? What if we're paying it back every month? Not just the minimum payment, but the interest saver payment, the one that won't let the loan grow. Well, if we were just floating that credit card for X number of years, that's $216 a month. And let's say you pay some off, and then you have to charge things back, and you pay some off, and then the heater goes, and you pay things off, and you have to redo the roof, whatever. I'm just going to say for 20 or 30 working years, you're carrying something like this in this example, right? $216 a month. Let's see what happens. Well, if we got 20 grand balance and it's $216 a month payment, the annual cost on that is $25.92. 216 times 12, right? If we're carrying that in some capacity, fluctuating levels, you might have a credit card for a while, this, that, for 20 years. I don't even know if you want to see, as you can see here, what you're going to effectively pay credit card. I hope you're getting some serious points and you're going on some nice trips with those points, because you are paying, the reason why they're putting a credit card in your hand and offering you points is because you're, in many cases, we're paying them that, right? That's why they put them in our hands. Liability to us, income to them. Here's another one, auto loans. This one's a little bit simpler, and maybe what's nice is the number can be a little lower. Auto loans can be all different rates depending on your credit. I just took a 3% average interest rate, and I said a 5-year loan, and I just took a purchase price of $25,000. The question is, how many of those cars will you buy across your lifetime? And I'm not even taking into account an increase in cost of the cars in this. You got $25,000 over the course of a 5-year car loan payment. You paid back just under $2 grand. Okay, so be it. How many cars are you going to buy? You're not just going to buy one car over the course of your life. Is it going to be 5? Is it going to be 8? Is it going to be, that's pushing it. Is it going to be 10? You're going to buy cars for your kids, right? I just took this number, 9765, to use for use later. But look at the various products that the banks are offering us so they can make money. And our cost in these examples added up to 262 G's. 262 G's. Money out the door to us, interest expense. Income to them, interest income. All right? Your cost, their gain. That's only half the equation. Real quick. Wall Street. How does Wall Street make money off of us? 401ks, mutual funds, there's fees, there's transaction costs. They can be high as 3, they can be as low as a half a point, or they're typically like 1 when you add in custodial fees or assets under management fees or advisory fees or things of that nature. I did a quick, and the other thing, right before I did the quick analysis, we're actually incentivized to keep our money still, or keep the money put inside 401ks or IRAs, which are oftentimes just inside brokerage accounts where it's just mutual funds. That's what Wall Street wants us to know. Wall Street's in banks, financial planning departments. They want us to have our money sit inside mutual funds that they earn fees off of. You saw that earlier. Well, our money doesn't just sit there while we're working and investing. Interestingly enough, we're incentivized. There's an incentive to stay put. And that incentive effectively is, once we get to the point where we retire and we want to start dispersing money, we don't just pull it all out one fell swoop. Why? Taxes. Watch Nate's video. Nate's going to talk to you a little bit about positioning yourself to not have to pay Uncle Sam that much. But we can't just pull it all out because of the agreement we got into with Uncle Sam to start this whole thing, which was, don't pay a tax dollar now. I'll let you save that tax dollar, push it in that 401k while you're saving and investing. And then, in the future, the more you pull out, the more you'll owe me. That's what happens. So what does this look like? What I did was I didn't even take contributions into account. I just effectively took a typical retirement account, just so you know where I got these numbers. And I said, what if your retirement account, by the age you're 35, with your contributions, with your employer contributions, what if your account just had 100 G's in it and you never contributed again? Without going too deep down these roads. I also took the last 15 years of the S&P, right? So if I said, hey, here's a mutual fund, it's it's been a positive territory, actually double-digit territory for 12 of the last 15 years. How's that sound? That manager's great. That's awesome, right? We're just going to put that money in there and let it ride, let it sit. Wall Street will say, let it ride. I mean, that's a gambling term, right? Yeah, but just let it ride. Let it ride. Just let that money sit until you're retired, and then at some point you'll have to pull the money out. But let's just say that you're contributing on top of this. And I'm just going to look at this little piece of your 401k because there's money on top of this. And you know what you're trying to do? You're trying to make sure that, there's money that you don't have to touch. There's money that you don't have to pull out. You're taking RMDs off of other dollars or whatnot. And you want to make sure you're leaving money behind to your spouse or your kids. Well, I want you to see something here. I got these numbers. Look at the money that's over the course of time, the money that Wall Street earns. Remember, your asset is actually, in this case, it's actually their asset also because they're taking fees and assets under management off of it. If we just have 1.5% of fees involved here, you can see $241,000. Actually have that on the screen here. $241,000 of fees. What if it's an actual 2% account? $264,000 of fees and 3%. Whoops. $272,000, and this is just Remember, this is just $100,000 sitting there. You probably contributed more than this, right? That's just the money that's sitting there, the money you don't want to touch because you don't want to be taxed on it, or you want to leave it as a legacy even though it's going to be taxed to your heirs. That's a significant chunk of change that's acquired as income by Wall Street over time. So consider the opportunity. Look at the money that's flying out the door in interest. Look at the money that's flying out the door in the form of fees, and consider the opportunity on those dollars. For those of you in the audience who have a Wealth Max account and understand the perpetual wealth strategy, you're probably taking some of these dollars, cycling it through your own policy, and earning that money yourself, right? You're preventing that money from flying out to the banks and Wall Street, and you're taking advantage of the opportunity of making those dollars work for you, right? What if you had a cash value policy? What if you had a Wealth Max account on your scorecard? What does that change? Well, let's take a look at 4 quick things, right? What if, teach this to your kids, what if you saved for your first car inside a policy and then use that policy as a personal bank just to buy a car, right? If you were following the typical path, you've probably seen this from one of our Infinite 101 videos. If you're following the typical path, you're buying the car with credit, paying it back, paying them interest, driving the car around until it breaks down, buying another car with credit, same thing, a couple times throughout the course of your life. Never getting ahead with that. Always owing more and more interest on the car loans. And depending on how many cars you buy, it's more interest that you've paid. Even if it says 0% interest, just know that they're wrapping interest into the cost of the car. That's a whole different story. We actually have online, we actually have a nice car buying guide that Bill and Patrick put together, so you might want to check that out. Here's what can happen inside policy, and you know this, especially the clients in the audience that have one of these. You can save inside the policy, and then that thing continues to grow even while you use it. So you have money working in your world, on your scorecard, in this part of the scorecard, on that part of the balance sheet. What about using a policy as a family bank? Most people, actually I was going to do this earlier. Most people, they have money come in the front door, and especially after today's talk, they're like, holy cow, look what I'm spending in fees and in interest. That money's just flying out the door. Well, our clients, you guys in the audience and your friend and family that you're introducing this to, we can move money through a policy. Some of our capital, just move some of our capital through a policy and put that policy on the scorecard. Put it on in our asset column on the balance sheet. Have that money work for us. And then through the leverage provision, we're actually able to borrow against it up to 95% of the value and maybe even more in many cases, where you can actually move dollars, borrow against it, have those dollars buy something, whether you're using it as a consumer or an investor, and then cycle those dollars back to you, whether you're paying off the car that you financed yourself or whether you have a tenant in a property. Here's the tenant in the property that's cycling those dollars back. The entire time using the policy as a bank keeps more money in your scorecard. You get to win the game. You have more points in your favor, right? Here's another one. What about saving before you invest? Remember I mentioned earlier, especially when we first get out of college, first get a job, what are we taught to do? Usually it's introduced to us by the HR department. The company says, hey, I'm going to match you. Maybe you should save into your 401k. Well, technically you're investing, right? And what are you going to do? You're going to lock up dollars in a world, that's basically going to do this. You've seen what it does. It goes up every once in a while, goes down every once in a while. A lot of you guys have lived through, some nasty years. It's just going to do that. It's going to continue to do that. Who knows what's on the horizon? What if we taught, and when you lock money up in there, it's literally locked up. I mean, if you go to access it, you're going to pay. You're going to pay dearly. So what if we actually taught our kids? What if we actually taught our children, our adult children? What if those who are in the audience who are young, early in their career, what if we saved before we invested? There's a thought. What if we got money in a world where it would effectively do that for us, no matter what? What if we kept it liquid so that when we finally knew what we were investing in, we could jump on opportunities, as opposed to, follow the Wall Street mantra, which is, hey, get your money in there, do its thing. You know what? It's going to go down. It'll come back. Okay, just hang in there a couple more years. Well, it's okay. You're going to hang in there because you can't use those dollars anyway. People don't realize that until they get further along in time, when they're closer to that point in the mountain analogy. You're going to hear that from several of us, and it's the foundation of the perpetual wealth strategy. When you get into the crest of the mountain, the rules are going to start to change. You're going to start thinking twice about what's in your backpack, right? What if you started to save and put a policy and put capital in your backpack before you invest it? You may in fact find yourself with a lot more flexibility and opportunity to jump on. Here's another thing. There's the opportunity. I've already been talking about this. Having a policy on your scorecard, on your balance sheet, where you can then take those dollars and find investments, and cycle money back, or at some point in the future, turn that cash flow from the policy, turn that cash flow from your assets into income for yourself. Completely different than the money that we stick here in the bank at zero, or in our 401ks that we can't even touch. Or the money that's flying out the door because we're incentivized by the banks and positioned to need them for credit. I mean, having a policy on the balance sheet just offers so much more flexibility, right? So with all that being said, let's actually reflect here. This is the scorecard. You can draw it on a piece of paper. You can print out the handout that I'm gonna, we're gonna offer you through the summit here. You can do it on the back of a napkin. Maybe when you're out with a friend, or maybe you're out with a fellow business owner, or a fellow investor, and you're thinking of ideas on how to invest in a piece of real estate, or invest in a business, or how to make your money work for you. You can draw it out, or you'll at least be thinking of it. So you think, am I going to position my money just to grow, or do I want my money to be able to flow back to me as well? Do I want my money in a position where I know what it's going to do, as opposed to hope, where I know I'm going to protect myself from the money that flies out the door in the environments that we just looked at, with everything that we're taught with typical advice, and making sure we not only place a policy on our scorecard, but then through your wealth strategist, through everything you've learned, through stuff on our websites, through this summit, learning how to use it to maximize its value on your scorecard, on your balance sheet. So powerful. I really do hope you've learned and discovered new ideas through this. I think this one idea, if it can affect you the way it affected me, with how I just understand things differently now, then our time together was well spent. And I would strongly encourage you, review this concept in person with your own wealth strategist. So for those in the audience who are new to Paradigm Life, invited by a friend, this is the kind of conversation that you can have. And this is the above conversation, and we can also dive deep, like you're going to see in some of the other sessions, with a wealth strategist. So I invite you to connect with the wealth strategist that your friend or your family member is working with, and that you can connect with here. I would invite you to download your own scorecard and this short report that I'll have with it, associated with this session. And then, of course, if you'd like to brush up, Patrick has a good video on Infinite 101 of, or in our video library of how the scoreboard and the scorecard works, right? So you can check that out. So clients, friends and family of clients, so happy you were able to make it to this session. So happy you're able to make it to this summit. We are looking forward to so many good things here at Paradigm Life and to many, many, many prosperous years for you, our clients, and your friends and family. So please enjoy the rest of the summit. Download the stuff. Connect with your wealth strategist. Tell your wealth strategist they did a good job. And we'll talk to you soon.